Haru was a quiet boy, the kind of child people noticed only when he wasn't there. He lived in a small orphanage at the edge of the city, a place filled with the laughter and noise of many children. But Haru was different. While the others played games, ran through the halls, or argued about silly things, Haru often sat alone in a corner, observing, listening, and thinking. He wasn't shy and he wasn't unfriendly. He simply lived in a world slightly different from everyone else's. The caretakers at the orphanage often wondered what went on inside his mind. He rarely spoke unless necessary, and even then his voice was soft, almost fragile. But they also noticed something unusual about him. Haru had a special way of listening. When someone spoke, he didn't just hear their words, he absorbed the feelings hidden under them. When the wind blew, he listened closely, as though it were telling him a secret. When it rained, he sat by the window, letting the soft tapping of raindrops guide his thoughts. But nothing fascinated him more than music. The orphanage had an old radio in the dining area, always playing whatever station the caretaker found. Most of the children ignored it, but not Haru. Every time a piano piece came on, he froze. His eyes grew wide. His breathing slowed. It was as if time stopped just for him. His small fingers would gently tap the table or his knees, copying the rhythm and melody of the song. He didn't know the names of the composers, nor did he understand music in a formal way. But he felt it deep inside, in a place he couldn't describe. One caretaker, Mrs. Aiko, noticed this early. She would often smile quietly as she watched him from across the room. "This boy hears music differently," she once whispered to another caretaker. "It's like the piano is calling to him." But Haru had never touched a real piano before. The orphanage didn't have one, and he had no family to buy him such things. Still, his desire to feel those keys continued to grow. Sometimes, late at night when everyone else slept, Haru sat on his bed and imagined himself playing. He pictured a big, shiny piano in front of him, its keys glowing under soft lights. In his mind, his fingers danced across the keys, creating sounds so beautiful he felt they could reach the stars. One day, fate stepped in. A volunteer group visited the orphanage to donate clothes, books, and old instruments. Among the items was a small electric keyboard, dusty, missing a few keys but still able to make sound. The volunteers didn't think much of it. They simply placed it on a shelf in the playroom. Most of the children poked it a few times and moved on to toys that were more exciting. But not Haru. The moment he heard the faint electronic sound it made, he froze. He slowly walked toward the keyboard, touched its surface, and pressed a key. The note rang out, simple, imperfect, but magical to him. He pressed another, then another. Before long, he was playing with both hands, searching for patterns, discovering melodies, and forming music in a way no one expected. The other children gathered around him, surprised. Haru never liked being the center of attention, but in that moment he didn't notice anyone else. His world had shrunk to just the keys beneath his fingers. Mrs. Aiko stood at the doorway, her eyes wide with amazement. "He's not just playing," she whispered, "he's creating." Haru had never taken a single music lesson in his life. Yet within minutes he was playing simple songs he had heard only once on the radio. He played by ear with incredible accuracy. When he made a mistake, he corrected himself instantly, as if guided by instinct alone. But the most surprising part was something nobody expected. He began to play a tune the caretakers had never heard before, soft, emotional, and beautifully shaped. It flowed like water, rising and falling with incredible grace. Haru wasn't copying a song, he was composing one. Right there on a broken keyboard in a crowded room, he created music as naturally as breathing. The room fell silent. Even the rowdy children, who usually never kept quiet, were mesmerized. They didn't fully understand what they were hearing, but they felt it. The melody carried something deep, something sad, yet hopeful. When Haru finally lifted his hands from the keys, the room remained still for a moment. Then the children burst into applause. Haru looked shocked. He didn't know how to react. No one had ever clapped for him before. He lowered his head shyly, but a tiny smile appeared on his lips, small but genuine. From that day on, Haru visited the keyboard every morning and every night. The orphanage staff rearranged the furniture so he could sit comfortably. Whenever he played, the children gathered around like an audience, listening quietly. Teachers who visited were stunned. Some said he played better than trained students. But Haru wasn't thinking about skill or fame. He played because music felt like home, like something that belonged to him even when nothing else did. He remained a quiet boy, still soft-spoken, still gentle, even when people praised him. But now everyone saw him differently. They saw the spark inside him, the gift he carried. The boy who once sat alone in silence now filled the rooms with music so breathtaking that even adults felt emotional when hearing him. Everyone at the orphanage believed one thing: Haru wasn't just a child who could play the piano. He was a prodigy, an extraordinary gift hidden inside a quiet boy who spoke best through music. Haru's childhood was shaped by silence long before he ever touched a piano. When he was very young, too young to remember clearly, he lost both of his parents in an accident. The caretakers at the orphanage told him the truth gently, but Haru never fully understood what it meant until he grew older. All he knew was that he had come from a home he could no longer return to, and the only thing left of his parents were vague memories shaped more by emotion than by detail. He remembered warmth, he remembered laughter, and he remembered the comfort of a mother's hug, but those memories felt distant, like a dream slowly fading every morning. Sometimes he tried to picture their faces, but they appeared blurry in his mind, slipping away before he could bring them into focus. The only thing he could remember clearly was the feeling of someone's hand patting his back gently while a soft melody played in the background. He didn't know if it was his mother or father, and he didn't know what the melody was, but the memory stayed with him, like a tiny seed buried deep inside. Growing up in the orphanage wasn't bad, but it wasn't easy either. The staff were kind, but they had many children to look after. Some kids were loud, some were troublesome, and some were lonely just like Haru. He wasn't bullied, but he wasn't exactly included either. He often stayed away from noisy games because loud sounds made him uncomfortable. He felt safer in quiet spaces, especially near windows where sunlight warmed his cheeks. The other kids didn't mind Haru's quiet nature. They simply didn't understand him. To them, he was the boy who barely spoke, who didn't join in, who always seemed lost in thought. Sometimes they teased him gently. "Hey Haru, are you sleeping with your eyes open? Why are you always staring at nothing?" But Haru never got angry. He just smiled softly and continued whatever he was doing. He didn't feel the need to defend himself because he wasn't sad, just different. Yet silence wasn't the only thing in Haru's life. There was another, deeper presence that followed him everywhere: music. He didn't know where it came from. Maybe it was from the radio, maybe it was from faint childhood memories. Maybe some part of him had simply been born with it. But even long before he played the keyboard, Haru felt music inside him like a quiet heartbeat. When he was alone in the orphanage yard, he listened to the wind rustling through the trees. To him, it wasn't just noise, it was a melody. When rain fell, he didn't hear random tapping, he heard rhythm. When someone laughed across the room, he could tell if the laugh was genuine or forced just by the tone. The world spoke to him through sound, and he listened carefully, absorbing everything. He often used his fingers to tap out rhythms on any surface he found: a table, a wall, his own legs. The caretakers saw this and thought it was simply a child's habit. But what they didn't know was that Haru wasn't tapping randomly. He was practicing, repeating, remembering. He was recreating the melodies he heard around him. When he was 6, one caretaker found him humming a complex tune that wasn't from the radio. She knelt beside him and asked, "Where did you learn that song?" Haru shrugged softly. "It came from here," he said, touching his chest. The caretaker didn't understand completely, but she smiled. "You have a special heart, Haru." As Haru grew older, he became even more withdrawn when it came to speaking, but more expressive when it came to listening. The children learned that if they needed someone to hear them without judgment, Haru was the one to sit next to. He didn't interrupt, didn't laugh, didn't give advice, but somehow his presence made others feel calmer. Still, as much as Haru connected with others through silence, he was missing one thing in his life: a way to express everything he felt inside. Sometimes he lay awake at night with emotions swirling inside him, sadness he couldn't explain, longing for something he couldn't name, and a deep desire for a voice he didn't have. And then one day, when the orphanage received the old electric keyboard, everything changed. The moment Haru touched those keys, something inside him unlocked. Every feeling he had kept hidden, every memory buried quietly in his heart, flowed into the music he played. It was as if the quiet child finally found a way to speak, not with words but with sound. His childhood, marked by loss, had also gifted him with something rare, an emotional depth that most children his age never experienced. And that emotion showed in every note he played. He didn't play like a beginner. He didn't play like a student. He played like someone who had lived through sorrow, grown through silence, and found a new world in music. People often say children who experience hardship at a young age either break or bloom. Haru bloomed softly, quietly, beautifully. The loss that made him silent also made him extraordinary. And although he didn't know it yet, the same silence that shaped his childhood would soon set the stage for a moment that would shock an entire audience and change his life forever. The charity event came into Haru's life like a surprise knock on a closed door. Unexpected, unplanned, and full of possibilities he didn't realize were waiting for him. It started when a group of community leaders visited the orphanage to announce a town fundraiser that would feature performances from children and young artists. The goal was to raise money for educational programs, but for many kids, it was simply a chance to stand on a real stage for the first time. Most of the children squealed with excitement, imagining themselves dancing, singing, or showing off small talents. Haru didn't join their laughter, but he listened. He always listened. When the caretaker explained that the event would include music performances, Haru felt something shift inside him, a tiny spark like the quiet opening note of a song. But he didn't say anything. He wasn't sure he belonged on a stage, he wasn't even sure he could play in front of strangers. Music was something private to him, a safe place inside his heart. He didn't know if he was ready to share it, but Mrs. Aiko had other thoughts. That evening, when Haru sat at the old keyboard practicing a tune he had heard earlier on the radio, she watched him from the doorway. His fingers moved with a softness that felt natural, like breathing. His expression was calm yet deeply focused. Something about the way he played carried emotion that adults struggled to express. When he finished, Mrs. Aiko walked toward him with a gentle smile. "Haru," she said quietly, "there's something I want to ask you." He looked up curious. "Would you like to perform at the charity recital next week?" Her words surprised him, his fingers froze above the keys. "Me?" he whispered. "Yes," she said, "you." Haru swallowed hard. The idea terrified him. Performing in front of the other children was one thing, but an entire audience, grown-ups, musicians, people who didn't know him and might not understand him. He lowered his head. I don't know if I can." Mrs. Aiko knelt beside him and placed a warm hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to be afraid. Music already speaks for you. All you have to do is let it." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he touched a key softly, listening to the faint note fade. Then he nodded slowly, shyly, but with quiet courage. "I'll try," he said. Preparations for the recital began immediately. The orphanage borrowed a better keyboard from a nearby school so Haru could practice properly. Every morning before breakfast and every night before bed, Haru spent time with the instrument. The keys were smoother, the sound cleaner, the feel richer. He learned how differently emotions bloomed through better sound. But Haru still wasn't sure what he would play. He didn't know many official pieces. He didn't read sheet music. Most children in music recitals performed songs they were taught by teachers. Haru had no teachers. His gift came from listening, from feeling, from instinct. One evening, as he sat alone in the playroom, he closed his eyes and allowed his fingers to wander. He didn't think, he didn't force the music. He just let his heart guide him. Slowly, a melody emerged, soft and flowing, rising and falling gently like a sad but hopeful whisper. He didn't know where it came from. Maybe it was hidden in the memory of his mother's soft humming. Maybe it was born from the loneliness of his childhood. Maybe it came from the dreams he never spoke about. Whatever its source, the melody felt right. When Mrs. Aiko heard it, her breath caught in her throat. "Haru," she said softly, "you have to play that at the recital." He nodded quietly. He knew it too. As the day of the event grew closer, Haru practiced more confidently. The children watched him proudly, some even bragging to visitors, "That's Haru, he's going to play in the recital." Haru felt shy hearing that, but also warm inside. It was the first time he felt supported by so many people. Finally, the day arrived. The orphanage staff gathered the children and dressed them neatly. Haru wore a simple white shirt and dark trousers. He looked clean, small, and gentle, almost fragile. But his hands, when they rested on his lap, held a quiet strength. The event took place in the community hall, a large building with polished wooden floors and a raised stage. It was the biggest room Haru had ever stepped into. The air buzzed with voices, parents talking, children laughing, musicians tuning their instruments. Haru felt overwhelmed at first, but he breathed slowly, just as Mrs. Aiko had taught him. When someone asked, "Who is the orphan boy performing today?" Haru felt a sting in his heart. The word orphan always carried a weight he couldn't escape. Some audience members glanced at him with doubtful expressions. Can he really play? He's never had lessons. He's probably just participating for fun. Haru heard everything. His hearing was too sharp not to, but he didn't let the words break him. Instead, he held his quiet melody in his heart like a shield. Just before the recital began, Mrs. Aiko leaned closer and whispered, "Remember, Haru, they doubt you because they don't know you yet, but they will." He nodded. The stage was waiting, the audience was skeptical. But Haru's fingers were ready to speak for the first time, not just to himself but to the world. And within moments, everything would change. The hall was filled with soft chatter as families, teachers, and musicians settled into their seats. Children who had already performed were whispering excitedly, while others waited nervously for their turn. Lights glowed warmly across the audience, bouncing off the polished wood of the stage. It was a lively, hopeful atmosphere, except for the quiet undercurrent of doubt that surrounded one particular performer, Haru. When his name appeared in the program, many people didn't react at all. A few raised their eyebrows, whispering, "The orphan boy, he's performing piano." Another shrugged and said, "Probably something simple, don't expect too much." Someone else added, "He never had formal training, this is just for charity." Their voices didn't reach Haru directly, but the feeling of doubt floated in the air like a cold breeze. He sensed it the moment he entered the hall with the other children. He felt the curious stares, the skeptical glances, the whispered comments. Not hateful, just dismissive. People expected little from him, and somehow Haru had grown used to that. He sat quietly backstage, listening to the performances happening before his turn. A violinist played a cheerful tune. A choir of small children sang a happy song, and the audience clapped loudly. A girl danced gracefully to music, drawing cheers. But as Haru listened, he didn't compare himself to anyone. Instead, he focused on the sound of the piano keys being tested, imagining how it would feel to sit before them. The hall felt enormous to him, larger than anything he had ever experienced. The space made the sounds bounce around beautifully, and Haru imagined how his melody might fill it. His heart beat faster with each passing minute, not from fear of failing, but from the weight of being heard. He wasn't used to being noticed. He wasn't used to having so many eyes waiting for him. Finally, a volunteer approached him. "It's almost your turn, Haru. Are you ready?" He nodded gently, clutching his hands together to keep them warm. His fingers were small, but they held a world of emotion inside them. As he stepped closer to the stairs leading to the stage, he heard another whisper from a woman in the front row. "Oh, that must be him, poor child. How much can he really do?" He paused, not because her words hurt, but because they reminded him of something. The quiet sadness he had grown up with, the loneliness that shaped him, the memories of tapping melodies in empty rooms. Every doubt directed at him felt like an echo of his past, but today he would respond with music. The host walked on stage and announced the next performer. "Please welcome Haru, a young pianist from the city orphanage." The applause was polite but unenthusiastic, more courteous than excited. Haru felt the atmosphere shift. It wasn't hostile, but no one expected anything remarkable. Many audience members leaned back in their seats, prepared to listen to something simple, something ordinary. Haru took slow, careful steps onto the stage. The lights felt warm on his face, almost comforting. The piano sat at the center like a giant familiar friend. Even though this was the largest piano he had ever approached, he recognized the feeling instantly, the quiet waiting hum of music inside the instrument. He sat down on the bench, adjusted his posture, and placed his hands gently on the keys. The hall grew quiet, very quiet. People watched him with mild curiosity. Some children looked bored, others sympathetic. A few adults whispered predictions. "He's too small for a difficult piece. He might just play a children's tune. Let's hope it's short." But Haru didn't hear words anymore. He heard only the quiet before a beginning, the breath before the first note. He closed his eyes. He inhaled softly. He thought of the lonely nights, the radio music, the broken keyboard, the memories of a mother's soft humming. He thought of how music helped him survive the emptiness of losing everything. And then, with a calmness that came from deep within, Haru pressed the first key. A single, delicate note floated through the hall. It was soft but stunningly pure. The audience didn't react immediately. They simply sat still, surprised that one note alone felt so emotional. Then Haru began to play slowly at first, letting the melody breathe, then gradually building warmth and complexity. The skeptical faces began to change. People leaned forward in their seats. A few widened their eyes, some stopped blinking entirely. The boy they doubted, the orphan they overlooked, was suddenly transforming the hall into a world of emotion. His fingers moved with surprising skill, gentle yet confident, precise yet deeply expressive. He didn't follow a sheet, he followed his heart. Every note carried a story he never put into words. The melody rose and fell like quiet waves, revealing pain, hope, longing, and something beautiful beneath all the sadness. It was a song no one expected, a song that made the hall forget it was just a charity event. For the first time, the entire audience fell completely silent, not a skeptical silence, but one of awe. Haru didn't see their expressions, but he felt something new: attention, respect, connection. In that moment, the once skeptical audience began to understand. This quiet boy wasn't ordinary, he was extraordinary, and the recital was about to become unforgettable. The moment Haru's fingers touched the keys, the world around him seemed to melt away. He no longer felt the weight of the audience's eyes or the whispers of doubt that had surrounded him earlier. All he felt were the keys beneath his fingertips, cool, smooth, and familiar. Even though this piano was bigger and more powerful than the small keyboard at the orphanage, it welcomed him like an old friend waiting patiently for him to speak. Haru began with the soft, opening notes of the melody he had created himself. It drifted through the hall like a fragile ribbon of sound, delicate yet full of meaning. At first, the audience expected something simple, something ordinary. But the more he played, the more their expectations unraveled. His fingers moved with surprising grace, each note flowing naturally into the next. There was no hesitation in his movements, no fear, no uncertainty. He played as if the piano understood him, as if each key contained emotion he had been carrying inside his heart for years. His small hands glided over the keyboard with confidence far beyond his age. The melody deepened, growing richer and more expressive. It carried sadness in the low notes, longing in the middle tones, and a shimmering hope in the higher ones. Every sound revealed a part of Haru's silent world, his loneliness, his memories, his hidden dreams. He didn't need lyrics, he didn't need explanations. His music was his voice. The audience slowly leaned in, their skepticism fading with every passing second. The quiet boy they doubted just moments ago was now commanding the entire hall, not with loudness or showmanship, but with pure emotion. A man in the front row blinked in surprise, whispering, This is no ordinary child." A woman beside him wiped her eyes. No lessons, impossible, look at him. But Haru wasn't looking at anything. His eyes were half closed, not in performance style but in deep concentration. He was not playing for applause or recognition. He was playing for himself, for the comfort music gave him, for the memories that shaped his heart, and for the quiet connection he always searched for in a world that felt too big. As the melody continued, the entire hall fell into an emotional silence. It wasn't the silence of waiting, it was the silence of being moved. The kind that happens only when something touches the soul deeply. Even the children who usually grew restless during performances sat perfectly still. Some hugged their knees. Others stared at Haru with wide, shining eyes. They didn't understand why, but they felt something powerful in the music, warmth, sadness, hope, all woven together. Midway through the piece, Haru played a section that rose like a gentle storm, stronger, braver, filled with determination. It was as if he was telling the audience, "This is who I am. This is the voice I never had. This is the story I carry inside me." The skeptical musicians in the audience stood a little straighter, recognizing the technique hidden behind the emotion. His timing, his dynamic control, his instinct for harmony, these were not things ordinary children did. This was talent, this was raw, untouched genius. Backstage, the volunteers and caretakers were frozen where they stood. Mrs. Aiko had tears streaming down her cheeks. She had always believed Haru was special, but she never expected this. She whispered, "He's blooming," right in front of all of them. As the final section approached, Haru let the melody soften again, like a gentle whisper returning to silence. His fingers slowed, the emotions melting into peace. The hall remained breathless, every heart waiting for the final note. Then, with delicate precision, Haru played the last gentle key, a soft, fading sound that hung in the air like a memory refusing to disappear. And just like that, the melody ended. For a second, the hall stayed frozen. No one moved, no one clapped, no one even breathed. It was as if the world needed an extra moment to absorb what had just happened. Haru sat still, unsure of what the silence meant. Had he done something wrong? Had they not liked it? He lifted his hands slowly from the keys, ready to stand up quietly and leave the stage. Then it happened. A single clap echoed from the back row, then another. And then all at once the entire hall erupted. The applause was thunderous, deafening, overwhelming, alive. People stood up from their seats, cheering, shouting, crying. Children jumped to their feet. Parents covered their mouths in shock. Musicians clapped hardest of all, humbled by the talent of a child who came from nowhere. And for the first time in his life, Haru felt something he had never truly felt before. He mattered. His music mattered. His voice, silent for so long, had finally been heard. His voice, silent for so long, had finally been heard. Haru lowered his head, overwhelmed. Tears pricked at the corners of his eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of release, of joy, of finally being seen. The boy who entered the hall with doubt surrounding him was no longer invisible. He was unforgettable. And this was only the beginning of how music would change his life forever. When the applause finally softened, Haru stood on the stage unsure of what to do next. His heart was beating so fast he could hear it echoing in his ears. He lowered his head politely the way he had seen other performers do, but the audience clapped even louder, cheering as if they wanted to lift him higher with their voices. For a boy who had spent most of his life unnoticed, the sudden attention felt unreal, almost too bright, too big, like stepping from darkness straight into sunlight. He wasn't used to faces turned toward him. He wasn't used to admiration, but in that brilliant moment he wasn't afraid. He simply felt warm, seen, valued. Haru walked off stage with small, careful steps. The moment he reached backstage, he felt arms wrap around him gently. It was Mrs. Aiko. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "Haru, you were incredible." He didn't reply right away. He just hugged her tightly, something he rarely did. For years, she had been the closest thing to family he knew. Her encouragement had given him courage to play, and her faith made him believe in himself, something he had never thought possible. Behind them, the volunteers and staff were buzzing with excitement. They congratulated Haru, touching his shoulders, praising his talent, asking how long he had been playing. But Haru could only smile shyly, feeling overwhelmed. He wasn't used to this much attention at once. Back in the hall, parents and musicians were still talking about him. A few couldn't believe what they had witnessed. "He plays like he's been trained for years," one musician said. "His touch, his expression, that melody, where did he learn something like that?" asked another. A mother in the audience wiped her eyes. I never expected to cry today, that boy, he played from his soul. The skeptical whispers that had filled the hall earlier were gone, completely replaced with admiration, respect, and even awe. After the event ended, many audience members came to the orphanage booth, asking to meet the child pianist. They offered gifts, encouragement, and admiration. Some wanted to sponsor him, others wanted their own children to learn from him. Some even asked if he could perform again at future events. But Haru didn't hear all these offers. He was too overwhelmed, too wrapped in the warm shock of what he had just experienced. Instead, he sat quietly on a small chair backstage, legs dangling, holding a cup of warm juice someone had given him. His hands were still trembling, not from fear but from excitement and leftover emotion. He replayed the moment again and again in his mind, the keys, the hall, the stillness, the applause. He wondered if his parents would have been proud of him. He imagined them standing somewhere in the audience with soft smiles, cheering louder than anyone else. The thought filled his chest with a bittersweet ache. Soon, the caretaker in charge of the event approached him with a kind smile. She crouched down to his level and asked gently, "How did it feel, Haru?" He looked down and whispered, "Warm." She laughed softly, "Warm." Haru nodded. Inside here, he touched his chest lightly. That simple gesture said more than 1,000 words. As the hall emptied, a man approached the caretakers, a music teacher from the local academy. He had been sitting in the middle row, watching Haru's performance closely and silently. His eyes were filled with fascination, and his mind was already racing with possibility. "Is that the boy?" he asked. The caretakers nodded proudly. The teacher watched Haru, who was still quietly swinging his legs on the chair. "He has something rare," he said softly. "Natural instinct, emotional depth, musical sensitivity far beyond his age." Mrs. Aiko felt her heart jump. "Do you think he has potential?" The teacher smiled. "Potential. He has something that cannot be taught, a gift." He approached Haru slowly, not wanting to scare him. "You play beautifully," he said gently. Haru looked up shyly. "Thank you. Would you like to learn more real lessons, a real piano? A chance to grow your talent?" Haru blinked. The idea seemed too big to understand. "Learn?" he whispered. He had learned everything by listening to radio music and a broken keyboard. The thought of real lessons felt like a dream. "Yes," the teacher said warmly. "If you want, I can teach you." Mrs. Aiko placed a hand on Haru's back, giving him comfort. "It's your choice, Haru." Haru thought about it. He remembered the feeling of loneliness that filled his early years. He remembered how music comforted him when words failed. He remembered how the melody he played felt like speaking the truth inside his heart. And he remembered the applause, the sound that told him he was not invisible. He nodded gently. "I want to learn." The teacher smiled widely, then it settled. That night, as they walked back to the orphanage, Haru held Mrs. Aiko's hand. He didn't speak much, but his heart was full. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just a quiet orphan boy. He was a musician, a prodigy, a child with a future brighter than he ever imagined. The recital had changed everything. His world had opened. His journey had begun. The days after the recital felt like a completely new life for Haru. The orphanage, usually filled with the same routines and familiar noises, now seemed brighter, warmer, almost as if the walls themselves were proud of him. But the biggest change wasn't around him. It was inside him. For the first time, Haru woke up each morning with excitement bubbling in his chest. He still sat quietly at breakfast, still listened more than he spoke, but something in his expression was different. His eyes, once soft and distant, now carried a spark, small, gentle, but unmistakably alive. The children noticed it too. "Haru looks happier," one whispered. "He smiles more now," another said. Even the caretakers exchanged knowing looks. They had always believed he was special, but now the world outside the orphanage had seen it too. But not everything changed immediately. Some of the children began treating him like a little celebrity, surrounding him and asking him to play more songs. Haru didn't dislike the attention, but he felt shy and overwhelmed. Whenever too many kids crowded around him, he would look down, fidgeting with his hands. Yet, when someone asked him softly to play the piano, he never refused. Music was the one place where he didn't feel scared. True to his promise, the music teacher from the academy visited the orphanage a few days later. His name was Mr. Takeda, a gentle man with kind eyes and a calm voice. When he entered the playroom and saw Haru sitting in front of the small keyboard, his expression softened. "Hello again, Haru," he said warmly. Haru bowed slightly. "Hello." Mr. Takeda placed a small bag on the table. "I brought you something." Haru tilted his head. He wasn't used to receiving presents. Inside the bag was a brand new set of headphones, a small music notebook, and a portable digital piano, much better than the old, broken one he had been practicing on. Haru touched the piano keys slowly, almost afraid it wasn't real. The surface felt smooth beneath his fingertips and the keys responded softly to his touch. He whispered, "Thank you," though his gratitude was far deeper than the words he managed to say. Over the next few weeks, Mr. Takeda visited regularly to give Haru lessons. He wasn't strict or demanding. Instead, he observed Haru carefully, trying to understand his unique way of learning. He quickly realized something remarkable. Haru didn't learn music the way normal students did. When he taught Haru a new tune, the boy listened once, just once, and played it back almost perfectly. When he introduced musical terms, Haru understood their meaning instinctively. When he played emotional compositions, Haru seemed to feel them immediately, as if he had lived the emotions himself. One afternoon, after hearing Haru perform a complex piece he had just learned that morning, Mr. Takeda sat back with a soft sigh. "You're not just talented, Haru," he said gently. "You feel music in a way that even adults struggle to understand." Haru looked down shyly. "I just hear it here." He tapped his chest. Mr. Takeda smiled. "Yes, and that's what makes you special." News of Haru's talent began spreading beyond the community. A local newspaper wrote an article about the orphaned Prodigy, whose recital stunned an entire hall. Little by little, invitations began coming in, small events at first, local gatherings, school festivals. Haru was offered opportunities to perform again, but each time the caretakers asked him first if he truly wanted to. Haru always answered with a soft yes, but not because he wanted applause or attention. He played because every performance felt like a tiny piece of healing, both for himself and for anyone who listened. Yet as his world grew bigger, Haru remained the same gentle, quiet boy. He still spent time sitting by the window listening to the wind. He still hummed melodies under his breath while tying his shoelaces. He still smiled softly when children played around him, but something else began happening too. People started believing in him. Mr. Takeda believed in his future, the caretakers believed in his growth, the children believed in his ability. The audience believed in his talent. For the first time, Haru felt he wasn't alone. One evening, after a long day of practice, Haru sat on his bed holding the music notebook Mr. Takeda had given him. Its pages were now filled with melodies he created, tiny pieces of his heart drawn in the language of notes and rhythms. As he flipped through the pages, he realized something profound. Music wasn't just sound to him anymore. It was connection, it was belonging, it was hope. And the recital, once just a performance, had changed everything. It had opened a door to a future he never knew he could have. It had given him a voice louder than words. It had turned him from a quiet orphan boy into someone the world wanted to hear. But Haru didn't think of himself as a prodigy. He thought of himself simply as a boy who loved music. And now, with each passing day, he understood more clearly. His journey had only just begun. The world was waiting, and he was finally ready to step into it, not alone, not invisible, but as someone whose music could touch hearts everywhere. Months passed, and Haru's life continued to transform in quiet but meaningful ways. The world outside the orphanage slowly learned about the little boy who played the piano with extraordinary emotion. Some called him a natural genius. Others called him a miracle. But Haru didn't think of himself as either. He simply felt grateful that people could finally hear the voice he never knew how to speak out loud. Through the help of Mr. Takeda, he began attending small community events where he performed pieces he learned or melodies he composed himself. Each time he stepped onto a stage, the audience watched with the same wonder they had felt during his first recital. But Haru didn't perform for their amazement. He performed because it made him feel connected, less alone, less silent. Still, beneath all the applause and excitement, Haru remained the same gentle, thoughtful boy. He still preferred quiet corners, still listened more than he spoke, and still spent hours simply observing the world. His gift had grown, but his heart remained humble. One day, the orphanage received a letter that would change Haru's future yet again. It came from the director of a prestigious music school in the city, a place known for training some of the country's most talented young musicians. The letter praised Haru's natural talent and offered him a full scholarship, including lessons, performance opportunities, and a chance to grow in a supportive, professional environment. When Mrs. Aiko read the letter aloud, Haru sat still, his small hands resting in his lap. He didn't fully understand the weight of the opportunity, but he sensed it was something important, something that could shape the rest of his life. "Do you want this, Haru?" she asked gently. He thought for a moment. He remembered his quiet days in the orphanage, tapping melodies on old tables. He remembered the first time he touched the broken keyboard. He remembered the magical feeling of playing in front of an audience. And he remembered the applause that made him feel alive. With a soft but steady voice, he said, yes. The next few weeks were filled with preparations. The school arranged for Haru to move into their special student dormitory, not far from the orphanage. Though it wasn't adoption, it was a new kind of family, a community that believed in him. The children at the orphanage hugged him tightly when he packed his small suitcase. Some were proud, some were jealous, but most were genuinely happy for him. "You'll be famous one day," one child shouted. "Don't forget us," another said. Haru smiled shyly. "I won't." On the day he left, Mrs. Aiko walked him to the school gates. She held his hand the entire time, her steps slow, as if she wanted to stretch the moment longer. When they reached the entrance, she knelt down and hugged him tightly. "You've grown so much," she whispered. "I'm proud of you. You have a beautiful future ahead, Haru. Let music guide you just like it always has." Haru hugged her back, and for the first time he felt the warmth of a motherly embrace, a feeling that had lived only in faint memories until now. He didn't cry, but his heart felt full to the point of overflowing. As he entered the school building, he heard the faint sound of a piano being played somewhere inside. It drew him in like a gentle pull. He followed the sound until he reached a practice room. A teacher inside nodded at him and said, "Welcome, Haru, we've been waiting." It didn't take long for the school to recognize just how rare his talent was. Haru learned new pieces instantly, created melodies that even teachers found astonishing, and expressed emotion in every note he played. Soon he was invited to perform not just locally but in other cities. His audience grew, his confidence grew, and slowly so did his dream. But despite the recognition, Haru never forgot where he came from. He often returned to the orphanage to play for the children and caretakers. His music filled the halls with warmth, turning the place of his quiet childhood into a place of hope and joy. One evening, after performing at a charity concert organized by the school, Haru looked out at the audience, a mixture of strangers, teachers, families, and musicians. In the front row sat Mrs. Aiko, smiling proudly at him. As he played his final piece, a soft, emotional melody he had composed himself, the hall fell silent just like the first time he performed. But this time, the silence wasn't filled with doubt. It was filled with admiration, respect, and love. When the final note faded, the audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation. Haru bowed gently, but his eyes were searching, not for applause, not for praise, for gratitude. For the journey that brought him here, for the quiet boy he once was, for the music that saved him. That night, when he placed his hands on the piano for one last encore, he played not to impress but to express something simple and true. He was no longer alone, he was no longer silent. His music had become his voice. And the world was finally listening. And the world was finally listening.